Hey everybody, hope you're having a good day. If you've had a good day and that you had a good weekend, good Mother's Day. I got a new shirt, Social Distance Champion, Bigfoot. I want to appreciate Rich sending that to me, and I'm enjoying it. Well, I just got it today, so I thought I'd wear it for him. And I want to just give you an update today on where things are in Massachusetts. I got a Bible verse for you that I'd like to share. And it says in 1 Timothy 2, verse 1 and 2, it says, I exhort, therefore, that first of all supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. And, we're to pray for our leaders. They've got tough, difficult decisions to make that affect a lot of different people. And we want to be able to lead a quiet, peaceable life. And I wanted to take tonight wasn't really so much of a Bible study per se, but just kind of to review where we're at, how we got there, and what might be coming for us. There's no way to know as far as the church goes. Let me say this up front, that I believe churches are essential. Now, many governments disagree with that, Massachusetts being one of them, and we can still respect our authority and respectfully disagree. We can still pray for them and disagree with them. We can still appreciate the job they're doing and disagree with them in an area with a good spirit, and that's my attitude. But just to quickly recap, back in March, when Governor Baker issued the COVID-19 order number 13, in that order, churches were not deemed essential. However, most likely in an effort to avoid a constitutional issue, they were told that they could keep their doors open so long as they did not have more than 10 people in the building. And because if they were ordered to close their buildings, they could quicker run into a constitutional issue when we consider the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment and so on. And so government has been, I think, in most instances, very cognizant of that potential conflict. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But churches are allowed to meet in small numbers to perform live stream services, and there's really no issue with that. We'll talk about that with an exception in a moment. But this order has been problematic as it pertains to churches. First, logically, it just does not take into account the size of the church, and really across the country that I find this to be a glaring fault, that a church plant that's in a storefront that can seat 25 people can have 10 people in it, and a church auditorium that seats 350 people can only have 10 people in it. Really doesn't make much sense from a health standpoint, from a public health standpoint. That makes little sense. And I've been critical of that from the beginning, but with the nature of orders, they're not meant to last long. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But in the state of Massachusetts, there's really been two big issues that have come about. And the first is with Adams Square Baptist Church in Worcester with Pastor Chris Casey. And a few weeks back, I think about 3 weeks ago, he felt led of the Lord to have services for whoever would come. And obviously that was above 10 people. Now he has a 300 plus seat auditorium. I just read an article today. It's so disingenuous where the article title says Pastor in Worcester violates social distancing. Listen, if 20, 30 people meet in a 300 seat auditorium, there's no problem with social distancing. It will be far more distance than it would be in any grocery store or a hardware store or liquor store or any other store you could go into at this time. Anyhow, he's been fined. He has been threatened with more fines. He's been had a criminal complaint filed against him. He has been told that he may be arrested. That hasn't happened as of yet, because I think at the end of the day the state knows they really don't have a constitutional leg to stand on, that whatever they do won't stick long term. We'll talk about that more in a minute and why that is. The second issue, which is really even more disturbing, has been out of Dedham, Massachusetts, with Pastor Nick White over at Victory Baptist Church. Brother Nick's a good guy, and it's just a church plant. He's only a couple of years old there, and he had not been having services except doing live stream from the church. And he just felt, that it would be nice to have some people there during the live stream, and so he because their church is in right in the downtown area of Dedham, and so he just let the local police know that they would be having under 10 people in services, and that was very. He didn't have to do that. He graciously did that, and he received a phone call the next day from the Public Health Department of Dedham saying that they would not be allowed to meet to have live stream services there, that even though he would be under 10 people, that they would not be allowed to do that, which is in direct violation of the governor's order number 13. Really, that's an embarrassment to the city of Dedham, and it's an embarrassment to that public health official who should be doing his job, not abusing his power, going against governor's orders. And so hopefully that'll get worked out. And so how did we get here? How did we get to this place? Let's say this, COVID-19 is a serious threat, all right? And with all due respect to people who think that this is a scam, I do not, or at all. In the state of Massachusetts, you can look from about the middle of March to the middle of April, and the death rate in Massachusetts, this is not labeling who died of what. The death rate in Massachusetts increased from the previous 5 years average by 120%. Okay, that's not saying who died of coronavirus and who didn't. Forget that. That shows you right there something abnormal is happening when a death rate based against the previous 5 years is increased 120%. So anybody who thinks that people are making this up, with all due respect, I disagree with you, and maybe it just hasn't hit your area very badly, but we've had two families in our church that have had immediate family members die. Another family in our church almost lost somebody very close to them, and God did a miracle, and they're recovered, and we thank the Lord for that. Another man lost a good friend, and we're dealing with another family that has an immediate family member that is on a ventilator right now. And so these are real people that we really know, that people in our church really care about, okay, that are dying or very close to death, and these are lives that are being impacted. And so I'm not going to get into debates of numbers or anything like that. It's real, it's here, it's affecting the elderly, and it's affecting those with a compromised immune systems in a very great way. The reality is our church has been blessed to have nursing home ministries. We do about 20 services a month normally in nursing home services, and the fact of the matter is that one day when we get back, some of those dear folks will be gone because they died because of this. And so it's very serious, and we take it very seriously. And back in the beginning, when the order to shelter was first put in place by our governor, it was so that our hospitals were not overrun. Somehow because the CDC has been very clear from the beginning that social distancing does not make you not get it. It just slows down the rate in which people get it. That you're going to come in contact with it until 60 to 70% of the populace has gotten it, or there's a vaccine, one or the other. And so anyhow, the Governor Baker issued the order to shelter in place. Now, orders are not laws. A lot of people misunderstand that. Orders are not been voted on. They haven't been passed through legislation. They're just things that governors can do in time of crisis where they need to act quickly for a short-term basis. And so the order that churches were not to meet is definitely not constitutional, and I think everybody in government understands it's not constitutional. And originally, I believe that the hope for COVID-19 was basically shelter in place for 2 weeks. If you remember back, it's like, yeah, just stay home for 2 weeks. That's what the big deal was. And I think people were hoping that this would be short-lived. Obviously, that is not how things have transpired. This thing has lingered and gone from 2 weeks to 2 months, and there's no end in sight. And so the idea was when these orders were put in place that were unconstitutional by telling churches that they couldn't meet, and other things that have been put in place that probably would not hold up in a court of law. The original thought was by the time it ever got to a court that the order would be lifted, and thus there would be no issue, no reason to continue. However, with this thing lingering and the government's desire to keep large groups of people separated for health reasons, which I understand, that's their job to do. One of the things government is supposed to do is to look after the public health of people. I don't fault them for doing their job, and they find themselves in this bit of a conundrum right now because in an effort to help public health, you're violating the Constitution very clearly in some places, worse than others, and so this is really become a problem. So why don't government just give churches a list of guidelines they can and can't follow? See, here's the sticking point. You know how you always hear about people say separation of church and state, and they always use that to keep the church from having anything to do with the government? Well, the thing goes both ways, and really the government has no jurisdiction over a church. The government can't come in and tell a church how to operate. They have no authority, and they know that. And so they're very reluctant outside to say, don't meet over this number of people, which they know won't hold up in a court of law. And we're already seeing, as these are going to court, that churches are winning. There's absolutely no way a government's going to be able to tell a church what they can and can't do within their own building. It's going to be very problematic. And because of the separation of church and state. So they issue these orders just saying don't meet because they know they can't tell them how to operate, and they have no idea. They had no idea that these things would go beyond temporary. Now it's turning longer, and states know they're going to lose. So what are states doing? They know they're going to lose the legal battles. So they're dragging their feet on these orders in an effort to save lives. I legitimately understand the rationale. And what they're doing, though, and this is in Massachusetts, is they know they won't eventually, if it goes to court, they know they'll lose. It may take a while, but they know they'll lose. So what they're doing is they're utilizing the media to destroy churches in the court of public opinion. In other words, if you go to church, you obviously don't care about people. It's obvious that they're just doing it for the money. And this rhetoric that is so false is being disseminated and allowed and not combated by the slightest bit by our leaders because they know they're wrong. They know what they're doing is not in accordance with our Constitution, but they're trying to do right by public people in general. And so churches know they have a right. Some are choosing to meet despite the orders. And those that choose to do that, at least in this area, are being absolutely ridiculed, mocked, and destroyed by the media, which is influencing the court of public opinion, which is very devastating to a church when you paint it in a very negative light. And they're not even looking at the reality that the environment that's being created in church buildings is safer than any grocery store. It's safer than any hardware store. It's certainly safer than a liquor store, which is only selling death. All right, and same with abortion and marijuana shops and so on. And so, these places that are not bringing anything of value, some of these places, I should say, not bringing anything value to society are perfectly safe, but churches are dangerous. That is garbage. I don't buy it for a second. And so, the guys I've mentioned, have gone through a lot of ridicule for really no reason outside of the issue I'm about to talk about. So the state of Massachusetts has an advisory board. That advisory board consists of 17 different people. They are an eclectic group of state officials, CEOs of various different companies in various different fields, whether it be restaurants, manufacturing, different things like that. And then there are 2 mayors also on that advisory board. And so as usual, my light went out, but we'll just go with it. So the pastors sent a letter to the this to the governor last week. Really, was quite amazing how the letter, I think, was written on Monday or Tuesday, and it was disseminated, I think, late Monday, Tuesday, something like that. And within about 24 hours, there was like 150 signatures. And by the time it got to the governor on Thursday, it had 250 signatures, and the thing had only been circulating for like 2 days. And I believe last I heard, and this was last week, I think last Saturday, Friday or Saturday, it was up to over 360 pastors of largely independent type churches signing this and getting it over. And you know, the mayor of Boston just said, you know, oh, I've talked to churches, and you know, they're content not opening. Well, I wonder who on earth this guy was talking to. He's probably talking to the Catholic Church that could care less about being open because they're fine. You know, they don't care. All right. You know, we care about our people. All right. We know our people. We want to minister to our people. And there's all sorts of concerns of what's going out there with people's mental health, and we can't even get together with our people right now. But that's another topic. Anyhow, this letter was sent to the governor, and the next day, I think it was Channel 5. I might not be 100% accurate on which channel it was, but one of the main news media asked the governor, "Hey, what's your thoughts on all these churches?" That's a pretty significant number, and if you know the time frame in which those signatures were given, that's even more amazing, really, when you think about it. And he said, well, I look forward to seeing what the churches have to say to the advisory board. Now, that's a very carefully worded statement. Pretty interesting thing about the advisory board is there's not one person on that advisory board that has any type of religious connection. And so these are all politicians and CEOs. There's not one religious representative on that board. Further, there's a website where you could go to input your ideas on reopening, and you could pick from all sorts of hosts of different type of companies and so on and so on. But you know what was not one of the options? Because I did fill it out. Not one of the options was being a church. If you were a church, you did not have a voice. So when the governor said, I'm very interested in seeing what the churches have to say to the advisory board, with all due respect, there was no way for a church to say anything to an advisory board. Now, with that said, the Lord did enable me to make contact with one of the people on that advisory board. I reached out to them, and they very graciously responded to me, and I respect and appreciated that. And we had a cordial, brief email interaction, and that was before the governor said that. So when he said that, I look forward to seeing what the churches have to say to the advisory board. Lifeline Baptist Church put together a preliminary phase 1 reopening to reopen in phase 1, and I won't have time to get into all the details of that, but it was very restrictive what I put together. Bounced it off a few other people, and we felt it was a very good plan, and we submitted that to this member of the advisory board. Now, I have not heard back from them. I do know that today the governor came out and said that there will be a 4-phase reopening, and of course, no businesses were mentioned in that, and you know, that's understandable. I'm sure that'll be coming in the coming days, and but you know, I'll be interested to see and hope that some of the media follow up and ask about the churches. And I'll be very interested to see what the response was, because I don't know if anybody else submitted anything, but I know I did, and it was very detailed. And I think it would work. It might be some minor tweaking from church to church, and but it definitely could work. And you know, I'm willing to come up with. See, here's the thing: is I'm willing to come up with a plan that works for everybody. Because coming back to this church and state issue, separation of church and state, the government cannot come in and tell churches what to do. What can happen is churches can come up with their own guidelines that they'd like to follow, bounce them off the state, and the state says, yeah, that's good. And it's not the state telling churches what to do. It's churches saying, this is what we're going to do, and the state says, good job, and then holds us to it. I have no problem with accountability, all right? Bottom line is look, I just feel like the average person thinks Christians are a bunch of idiots who don't know how to social distance because I don't know what they think they're doing. But we're not morons. We're not dumb people. I am not an uneducated fool because I believe the Bible. I'm a very educated man, and God has gifted me with intelligence. I'm not being boastful about it. I just know what He's given me. And I didn't grow up in church. I have a secular degree. I worked in the environmental field, and at 20 4, immersed myself in the scriptures to see if these things were so, and found them to be factual and invalid. And in parts where you can't prove it, the reality is the opposing argument can't prove their position either. And the arrogancy of our secular world today is very embarrassing, because they just talk about Christianity as anybody believes that's an idiot. Well, look, some of the things that you believe from a secular standpoint, I don't think are very smart. Oh, nothing blew up into everything. All right, well, that makes a lot of sense. Anyhow, that's another topic. Look, we care about people. My heart is people. And I believe with all my heart that Lifeline Baptist Church and every other church that cares about people can have a safe, sanitized, and socially distanced service that is honoring to God, that is helpful to the mental well-being. People are needing God right now. And I'm dealing with it. I'm the one talking to people. I'm the one ministering to people. I'm the one who sees the people that are hurting and are at a distance, that are isolated and are alone and have nobody. And I care about them. And I understand our state cares about people too. I believe that. But they are ignoring the spiritual and mental health of their people for their physical health. And there is much literature coming out right now that as many people that have died from the coronavirus very well may die from suicide and mental health issues in the next coming year or 2 or 3, depending on where literature you read after. There is fluctuation, and I understand that, all right? I'm trying to stave that off. And the state is literally working against us to save lives, both physical lives and spiritual souls. And I know they don't care about that. That's not their job, but it is my job. And so I'm going to be passionate, because listen, here's the thing. If I believe hell is real, and I do, and people need to be saved from it, it would be negligent of me to not push this issue of being able to meet. You say, well, what about online? Listen, online's good. I'm not critiquing it. I'm thankful for it. But understand something. You watch my message, I am not preaching to you who are behind a camera. I'm preaching to those 7 or 8 people that are sitting there. Why? Because that's the ones that the Spirit is working on, that I can tell, and that's who I minister to. And if anybody else is benefited by that, then so be it. But my heart is with the people that I can see and the Spirit can lead and guide on what needs to be done. Listen, the reality is here. It's going to be an interesting few days. The proposal's submitted. I might probably just be ignored. That's probably what will happen. I'll probably hear nothing, and the state will probably act like churches don't even exist. And I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm prepared in my heart for that to happen. And so we're just looking to be treated fairly. That's all. Just if the grocery store can have 25% of its occupancy, then why can't churches? I don't understand why. And nobody has given me a valid explanation as to why, outside of you don't care about people. Oh, I care about people. I've committed my life to people. Don't ever tell me I don't care about people. That's garbage. And anybody who knows me knows that. Look, there's some of you out there, and I don't know if you'll ever watch this, but you just want to criticize churches for anything. Doesn't matter what they do. And so, they're just going to do that. Look, the reality is that people are already meeting in churches above 10 people. Adam Square is being vocal about it, but others are doing it and just aren't promoting it. And come May 18th, if there's not some give by the government of being fair, a lot more are going to. And if you're concerned about public health, then do right by your people. Do right by your people. And do right by your state. And allow churches, and I'm not even talking about synagogues, mosques, churches, be fair. And put proper policies in place. Because if churches just start doing their own thing, they're probably not, some of them won't have the best policies in place. So get an agreed upon policy that works for churches, which doesn't work for a store. There's differences, all right? And in the policy I submitted, it acknowledges and addresses those issues. And we have got to lean on our government officials to recognize the reality that people and their faith is important and they cannot be just dismissed like they have been. It's shameful. It's wrong. And I'm praying for my political leaders. I don't believe them to be bad people. They need to wake up. And they need to they need to lead their state effectively. And stop tying us who minister spiritually to people, which is important, because if you have a bunch of psychos with head problems running around your state, it doesn't help. They need the gospel. They need to hear good, sound teaching. They need mental health workers to work with them, and that's what I believe pastors are, all right? We're spiritual workers. We're mental health workers. Let us do our job in a safe manner. That's what I'm asking for. That's what I submitted. I've gotten nothing back, and I hope it doesn't stay that way. I hope that somebody on that advisory board wakes up and does their job, because God will hold them accountable. I don't know all of who you are, but God will hold you accountable if you do your job or if you don't do your job. And you're going to be judged by this, not by me. You don't need my approval. I'm just a guy. God will judge you by the Holy Bible. He said it in here. I can show you verse after verse after verse. And it's my job as a preacher of righteousness to tell our political leaders, you better wake up. And you better take God seriously, because He takes His church seriously. And you are not. And I got nothing but prayers and love for our political leaders. But sometimes when people aren't listening, you need to be a little bit firmer. And that's exactly what this is. I don't know that one will ever listen to it, but I'm doing my part, and that's all I can do. Listen, that's the update in Massachusetts. Till things change, I'm going to follow Bigfoot, social distance champion, all right? I'm going to do my part, but I'm hoping that somebody somewhere wakes up and realizes we need churches, and we need them doing their job. Lord bless you. Have a great night. Take care.